Today's event is titled Africa, Land of Bees and Opportunities. And we call it opportunities because, as we've heard and spoken to people, Africa teems with free-living honeybee colonies. And this is really the subset of the bee population that Honeybee Watch is interested in and studying. So before we start, again, introduce yourself in the chat. We really encourage people to use the chat because today is all about connecting. And, for us, this is the culmination of a 2-year dream, which is to meaningfully expand into Africa, and finally it's happening. So what we're going to be doing today is I will make a brief introduction to Honeybee Watch. And then we will hear from our 3 guests who will share stories about their experiences and projects and opinions on free-living honeybees, bees, beekeeping in general, from their experiences in Kenya, in Ghana, as well as continent-wide. And then what we're going to do is summarize the answers that you responded to from our questionnaire, which gave us really direction for the participatory part of today's event, which will follow my summary of the questionnaire responses. And then we're going to moderate a panel discussion with our guests. We'll open the floor to questions to you, and then we will wrap up with a poll. And with that, I'm going to begin with my presentation. And let me just share my screen. Our mission: we are an international coalition tasked with better understanding the biological, behavioral, and environmental traits that support survivorship among free-living honeybee colonies, with the aim of finding nature-based solutions to lower colony mortality rates, increase beekeeping sustainability, and ultimately to protect threatened populations. So let's just break down some of that. By free-living colonies, we mean Apis mellifera colonies that choose to live where they want. Those could be in a tree cavity, they could be hanging from a branch, in an animal burrow underground, in a building, or in a log hive that you place in a tree or on the ground to attract them into that home. We're more interested in the colonies that have little to no human interventions. In the West, in particular, many beekeepers treat their colonies with chemicals to kill varroa. They suppress or breed out or breed in certain traits that they prefer, such as docility, honey production, less inclination to swarm. They may harvest honey several times a year and replace it with sugar water. So these are very managed techniques, and these are things that do not interest us. So what we prefer are, the bees that are living on their own. And from what we see is that in Africa, this is the predominant type of bee living and beekeeping. So it's very interesting for us to be talking with people who have that kind of experience and not the very manipulated one that we see mostly in Europe. Another thing is nature-based solutions. So what we're hoping to do is learn the behaviors and kind of the situations that the bees in trees and bees that are living on their own, how they're surviving. And through that, observing nature, studying nature, sequencing their DNA, testing for pests and pathogens, doing pilot programs, we are hoping that we can apply what we learn to beekeeping to lower the incidence of mortality, which in the West it's incredibly sad right now. In the United States, for instance, they had more than 1 million commercial beehives that were lost over winter last year. And in some places in Europe, it's approaching 35–40% mortality rates. So this is our mission. And our vision and objectives, to simplify it, it's to basically form a coalition consisting of bee scientists, researchers, experts, beekeeping associations, NGOs, conservationists, and concerned citizens. And these citizens could be beekeepers, they could be park rangers, hikers, bird watchers, gardeners, farmers. It doesn't matter. We don't discriminate. If you're concerned about the bees and want to get involved, we welcome you. And we want to connect you, which is what we're basically doing today. We're going to share resources such as best practices, protocols, and of course, data. We also are co-authoring articles in peer-reviewed journals. We're applying for funding together, and we can provide guidance on communications, organizational infrastructure, community building, citizen science engagement, etc. And then we collect data. Of course, we're a science project. So we're doing this from individuals who we call citizen scientists, and we're doing it from research partners. So what happens is that if you want to participate, you can open up an account. You can record any nest sites that you know of or that are part of your beekeeping operation. And then once you've done that, we ask you to monitor the bees 4 times a year. And that activity helps us to ascertain whether or not that colony has survived or not. And then another one of our kind of objectives is once the science has come in, we intend to roll out educational programs and conservation campaigns that are supported by the science. It's not necessarily a linear progress from discovery of the science to education to conservation. There's lots of overlap, and when opportunities present themselves, we may go in a different direction. One thing to explain here as well is that we didn't really talk about expansion. We're starting with Apis mellifera, but eventually in a few years, we hope to include other Apis species like Dorsata, Serrana, largely in Asia. However, they are moving into Europe, they're moving into Africa, so we would like to see what's happening with them. And also, so far, we've been very focused on Europe, and I'll tell you why in a moment, but we want to change that and expand all over the world, and we are hopefully going to start in Africa. So where are we now? We've been around for 5 years. Already, we've collected about 2,500 nest sites on 5 continents. What you're seeing here is a snapshot of our mapping platform, which you can access through this QR code in the bottom right corner. One important thing to note is that if you participate, your GPS coordinates will never be shared publicly. We have an automatic masking system that gives about a 1 kilometer radius all around so that nobody can go in and potentially vandalize or steal these bees or their honey. So the majority are in Europe and USA right now. If you could see the map right now, Asia and Africa are largely empty. And due to that knowledge gap, we see a huge opportunity. And we hope that after today, you're inspired to actually participate, and we'll start seeing Africa be populated with wild nest sites all over. So we have been working for the last 2 years with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature to reassess the red list status of Apis mellifera in Europe. IUCN is the international governing body that assigns threatened status to wild animals and plants. Those range from vulnerable to threatened, near endangered, near extinction, extinction. And because of this partnership, it's one reason why we have so much kind of concentration in Europe is because the IUCN is, for us, doing an assessment in Europe. So disproportionately, we have many more nest sites located in Europe than elsewhere in the planet right now. We recently were part of a coalition that applied for and was awarded a 1.1 million euro grant from the European Union, a Biodiversity Plus grant, and that affords us the means to extensively research free-living honeybees in France, Ireland, Poland, Portugal, and Sweden over 3 years. And what we'll basically be doing is trying to locate, monitor, and sample as many nests as possible. From those sampled foragers and drones, we will be sequencing genomes, and we will be testing against managed apiaries for pests and pathogens. And from this, one of our nature-based solutions that we hope to pilot is taking survivor stock from these free-living colonies, placing them in treatment-free apiaries, and measuring their honey production, their survival rates, their varroa rates, etc. And if you want to learn more about that, you can take a picture of the QR code in the bottom right corner. And what we're also hoping is that out of Free Bee becomes a model for us to take this kind of methodology and apply it elsewhere around the world and possibly apply it for other grants to study the bees in other lands. Our mission is to form this coalition and to build it and to give some visibility to some of our partners. And we have been organizing events to do this. In 2022, we toured Blenheim Estate in the UK to visit their free living colonies. And Felipe Salvani, who is here with us today, originally from Zimbabwe, he's found, at least in 2022, have found more than 75 nests in ancient trees, some of them potentially 1,200 years old, on this huge property that was formerly Royal Hunting Grounds. And 50 people joined us. Some of you who are here today joined us, and we took a tour of the property to meet the bees and to see this spectacular land and learn more about the techniques and the conservation program that Felipe has established there. And we hope to do more of these in-person events in the future, potentially visiting other forests or apiaries, doing training sessions and workshops. Additionally, we are in our third year of the Honeybee Watch Symposia series. The next event is in a couple of weeks, and we're going to be visiting Africa again and hearing from 3 projects that are nature-based traditions and techniques in Africa. We have 2 other events. In September, 3 PhD students are going to share their current studies and data. And Kaylin, I think, is here as well. She'll be talking about a study in South Africa. And then in December, we'll be talking about policy issues such as banning non-native subspecies into lands or detrimental laws on the books that are not protecting our free living colony populations. Like I said, we've been doing this for 3 years. In the bottom right corner, you can take a snapshot of our QR code there and get redirected to the resources page, where all of the videos from past events are shared. And if you want to sign up for the rest of the events in the Symposia series this year, the QR code on the top will get you to that page. So that brings us to today's event. We wanted to meet with our African network because we call ourselves a global coalition. And the fact is, we're not very global yet at all. And we wanted to basically remedy that. And because there's this data gap, as you saw on the map, we don't have very many bees located and or registered in Africa. And because the continent contains the native geographic range of Apis mellifera, it was very natural for us to expand to Africa first. So for the last 2 years, we've been talking to people from Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, etc. And unfortunately, nothing has quite materialized yet, at least concretely, but there have been lots of conversations. And I was talking with Emmanuel, one of our guests today, about Nina, one of our other guests today, and telling him about what her observations have been in Kenya. And it just occurred to me, well, they should meet, they should have a conversation. And then it was this realization of, we should bring everybody in our network together. Why don't we call this working webinar for all of our people in Africa and explore where the opportunities are, where the needs are, where the interest is, and find out from you what you would like to do. Because we don't want to follow in the footsteps of the World Bank or some of these monolithic national, multinational NGOs and say, we know what's best and we're going to impose our beliefs or our methodology and protocols on you. That doesn't work. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you think is important locally, regionally. We want to hear where you see the challenges and what solutions might be applicable, and explore with you what is meaningful for you and how we, Honeybee Watch, can support you. And what we're trying to do is act as an umbrella. We don't conduct actual research. we connect the researchers, we connect everybody, we share the resources. So basically what we'd like to do is inspire you to collaborate, to form these groups, what we're calling regional cells, and then come to us and say, hey, we have a couple scientists, we have some beekeepers, we have some NGOs, maybe some politicians. What do we do? And then maybe we can work with you to provide introductions to others in your region, others around the world who might have experiences and or knowledge, help with fundraising, help with communications. Out of our free bee project, the 3-year project, we hope to create how-to manuals. So you can just get the PDF that tells you best cases in communications or fundraising or whatever. So this is Honeybee Watch, and hopefully that's a very brief introduction. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to our speakers. So Emmanuel, you are going to go first. We met through a mutual friend in Rwanda, Sarah Leadham. I don't know if you're here, but if you are, hello. Thank you for the introduction. He's a veterinarian in Ghana working on and studying honeybee health. His research has taken to the UK, to Kenya, and elsewhere in Africa. As a postgraduate student, he's worked with Ghanaian beekeepers nationwide and participated in FAO initiatives focused on antimicrobial use for beekeepers. Research of his published in the Pan-African Medical Journal details the characteristics of beekeeping in Ghana, common pests, local strategies that beekeepers employ to manage those pests. And now he'll share some of his stories and experiences in Ghana. If you could unmute yourself and share your screen. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So thank you. And I'm very much grateful to be here. My name is Dr. Emmanuel Piiru from Ghana. And then I'm excited to be here. I've gone through the chat and I've seen quite a number of people that I've seen through my research trying to use their materials in my work. And I'm so excited to be here. Yes. So I'm from Ghana, and today I'll be sharing with all of us what has been the story of Ghana in terms of beekeeping, and then what the role of free living bees are to the beekeeping community in Ghana here, and I think applies to most of Africa. Yes, so this is going to be my outline. And so, who am I? As introduced by Steve, I'm a veterinarian by training and currently doing postgraduate student studies. And I've been interested in bees, working with bees for quite some time now. So on the right, you see me with frame of bees, and this was my work here, which took me to the National Bee Unit in the UK, where we went to their demonstration hives to look at how they also handle bees. And then coming from the veterinary background, mine emphasis or interest is more of bee diseases and pests and how to make that not a challenge for local beekeepers and thereby increasing the production. And so down you can see myself and one of their regional bee inspectors, Jack. On you see my picture on the middle with at Isipe, where I went to the African Reference Laboratory for Bee Health to have some training on how beekeeping is done and then the kind of research that is being done in Africa to understand our situation in terms of bee diseases. And through my work, I have published one paper which is out there, and then I've indicated the QR code that you can use to assess. So basically, that gives a brief overview of who I am and then the work that I have been involved in working with local beekeepers here in Ghana and trying to understand how we can help in addressing bee diseases. Yes, so I'm starting with trying to bring on board when the conversation of bees and come up, people tend to view it as a field for conservationists and entomologists, and some people are still not conversant or familiar with having enough veterinarians in the field. But then veterinarians are very important in the field of apiculture and beekeeping because they have significant roles to play. Some of these include the surveillance of honeybee disease and pests, which is very important because most of these diseases are actually causing losses. And in Africa, there have been other reports of losses, but the research is not as strong as compared to the West and then North America, where there have been a lot of reports and then serious research that has gone into how diseases and pests actually causing loss to bee populations. And veterinarians are also very important to training and verifying proper bee management practices because some of these losses are not just due to bee disease and pest, but also about how managements are being handled by those that are like keeping bees, beekeepers and bee scientists as well, and ensuring the application of biosecurity measures and also treatments to honeybees. Also ensuring the safety of the food products and other items that we get, products that we get from bees. So veterinarians are very important in these areas. And in fact, the World Organization for Animal Health, which is abbreviated as WUA, has recognized or is recognized 6 honeybee diseases, which internationally all countries that are parties or part of WUA are actually mandated to report on this annually. And so it is very important for veterinarians to be involved, get close to beekeepers, understand the disease epidemiology and dynamics in the country, and to be able to report same to international partners and the World Organization for Animal Health, so that other countries that are close by and at risk may also have that information and may put in surveillance measures to curb the incursion of some of these pathogens and pests into those countries. So these include the brood diseases, American and European fowl broods, and small hive beetle, then varroa and the others. So coming to Ghana, having talked about the importance of veterinarians and why, as a veterinarian, finding my space in beekeeping and bee health, I would like to now share with the history that Ghana has had with beekeeping and bees. So historically, there have been beekeeping activities occurring in the country, and then honey hunting was predominantly the practice in the colonial era. And so when we became independent as a country, there were attempts in the 1960s to begin beekeeping, commercial beekeeping, and the first president then aided to import a number of bee colonies from the UK, and then they started to breed those in one of the locations in the capital. However, those bees could not survive because of the different environmental conditions that were present. So following that, there was a long period of more like not organized beekeeping recognized in the country until the 1970s, when the Kwame Nkrumah University Technology Consulting Center, which is here, was approached by local artisans. So these are artisans which they use beeswax to mold and cast some of these ornaments that you are seeing. And if you Kumasi, or the Kumasi here, where the K University is located, is having a very rich culture that they deal with a lot of bees ornaments, and the chiefs and rural elders use this in their cultural and then religious activities. So at the point, these artisans were having a challenge with getting wax And so they confronted the university community to help them in addressing the issue. And upon assessment by the team from the university, it was identified that instituting a beekeeping program would help to give these local artisans wax to so that their businesses do not go down. And so after those discussions, there were plans, and then they sent two individuals to Kenya and Tanzania, where they had experience of how they design and how they keep bees. And from there, in their return, we had them bringing the technology of Kenya top bars to Ghana. And so that is how come that we have Kenya top bars now in Ghana. And then, as you can see, currently in Ghana, if you go to beekeepers, you are likely to see a version of this. The first one is the Kenyan Toba, and then the other one is a modification of the Kenyan Toba that is presented here. So that has been the story of Ghana up to date. And since the introduction of those modernized or transitional hives, beekeeping has been in practice from the 1970s up to today. And then the technology that they invent or they use as and then hasn't really changed. We still have the traditional types of hives that they use, the cement hives or pot hives, and then we have the transitional hives, we have the Kenya top bars, and then various variations of those top bar hives that are used in Ghana. Then there is also introduction of the modern type, which are the Langstroth hives, and they are still being introduced because the local bees and some certain areas still do not colonize and the hives if they are using the Langstroth. So there's still some kind of innovation, transfer of innovation that is being done, and then working with international partners to make sure that that technology also comes on board in Ghana. So as are currently surveying beekeepers all across from our work, we found out that about 2% of the beekeepers are using the traditional beehives. 94% of them are using the transitional hives, which are the Kenyan tobas, and then the other variations, and about 14% of them are using modern hives. And if you look at what products they usually produce, almost all of them produce honey, and about 94% of them produce the wax. The other products are less harvested. Propolis, pollen, and royal jelly are also being harvested, but at a lesser quantity. The main products are honey and fruit wax in Ghana that is being produced. So having talked about all that's how Ghana started, and then the current situation of beekeeping in Ghana. One, I will now come to talk about the role of free living honeybee colonies to the beekeeping community in Ghana. So as Steve mentioned, the free living colonies referred here refers to bees that are found in other habitats, whether the caves or other places, except like beehives. And in Africa, it is very important to us because predominantly most of the beekeepers rely on capturing bee swarms to start or increase their apiaries. It is quite, having had the experience of going to the UK and then also to the Kenya and seeing the different beekeeping. Over there in the UK, people start beekeeping by getting or buying nukes and then using those ones to start. But in Africa, predominantly, most of them rely on getting swarms from the free living bees and then using those ones and then to start their beekeeping. So, and the active bee, they catch these during the active beekeeping season, which is characterized by the swarming migration of bee colonies, seconding, and then at that time to some the beekeepers will be doing harvesting and disturbing the bees to either spawn. Yes. So, and if you can see from our work here in Ghana, you see on my left that there are catcher boxes that are hung on trees. So this is how it is being done. These smaller boxes are hung with baits, containing baits that will attract the bees to these boxes. And once these boxes are colonized, then they are now transferred to the different, mostly to the transitional hive, which is the majority that is being used by beekeepers in Ghana, but also to the other types of hives. But so once they hang it like this, bees that are coming will settle, and once they colonize and they can now transfer them to the bee hives that they have in their apiaries. So this is how majority of the beekeepers here in Ghana, and I believe in most of Africa, I rely on for their bee colonies. So it tells us like how important free living bees are, and the importance of, whilst working to ensure the health and population of managed colonies, also looking to ensure the health and protection of um, the wild colonies or the free living colonies in all countries. So we all know that there are, what's the name, factors that are affecting the health of bees. These include environmental stresses, pests and pathogens, and others. And there's also more of interaction between the bee that we have in managed colony, in managed environment, and the population of bees that are not managed in our countries, and especially in Ghana here too. And this, we know, what's the name? There's interaction between them, in that some in Africa, it is the research shows that most of the pests and pathogens which are present and are causing damages in other parts of the world, especially the varroa. In Ghana, you in Africa, you see that colonies may have higher loads of varroa, but then the effect as seen in other parts of the world is not being felt in those colonies or in Africa. And working in Ghana here too, that experience or that observation has been made. And it tells us that there is some kind of resistant traits that the wild colonies have. And also how, what's the name? The interaction between them is beneficial to maintaining those resistant genes, and also transfer of that to the managed colonies, which at a point in time, if exposed to other stresses like treatment and others, may become weaker. So there is always that interaction between managed colonies and the wild colonies. And so to ensure, and Africa here is very important because we know that we get most of our swarms to starting with from the wards or the unmanaged colonies. So there is that frequent or mixing of managed and unmanaged colonies, and that interaction, if lost, will lead to depletion of these significant traits that we have in Africa, which is helping to sustain our beekeeping industry. Yes, so the question now is there a need for Africa here for us to conserve our bee populations? And the answer here is a yes. We have local threats that are affecting the bees, which includes how we still have people hunting, especially in Ghana here, hunting from nest and the wild. And by doing that, they use a torch, that is fire, naked fire, to hunt these um, honey colonies, honey from these bee colonies in the wild. And by their activities, sometimes lead to fire outbreaks, which burn vast areas of land. And all these things are causing are stresses to the bees, because they will destroy the flowers that they depend on. They will destroy the bee populations in those communities or in those areas. We have habitat loss due to the increase in population and agricultural activities that are going on, and there is clearing of massive lands. And we have the honeybee diseases that are also present in Africa. And the sad part is that there's not enough research to see the damage that is really being caused by these pathogens. And so all these threats are there, which are causing loss to the free-living bee colonies that we have. Hence, it is very important for us as Africans and as bee scientists that are found in this part of the world to be thinking about conserving, ways of conserving not only the managed colonies that we have with beekeepers, but also in managing the wild population, because we know that healthy natural populations act as reservoir or buffer for the losses that we may have in our managed colonies, because in Africa we know that most of our bee colonies we usually get them from catching from the swamp. So it's really very important as Africans that we begin to think about conserving and protecting free living colonies in our continent. Yes, so I think that gives us a brief overview of what the role of veterinarians are, the work that is being done in Ghana, the history, our history, and how beekeeping is done in Ghana, and also the essence of us here as bee scientists in Africa to begin thinking about conserving the free living colonies that we have, and then recognizing the importance that they have in sustaining our beekeeping industry here in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. If you could stop sharing your screen. So I really like the progression, starting with, here, I'm just going to mute you. Starting with the history in Ghana, and then kind of beekeeping practices and, what types of hives they're using, and then talking about the importance of the free living colonies. And I think, Nina, you're going to probably comment on some of the same things as well, that people are augmenting their apiaries by catching these swarms. And so they are very important and critical. And, it's nice that people are recognizing that the free living colonies are a, natural resource that really needs to be protected. And that's ultimately what the goal of Honeybee Watch is to raise the awareness about the importance of honeybee. Well, first of all, that they exist, the free living colonies, which many people in Europe said went extinct 20 years ago, but recognizing their importance and then trying to set up conservation programs. So thank you for your presentation. Thank you for sharing what's happening in Ghana. So I would like to move now to Nina, who is in Kenya. We met 2 years ago via Instagram, of all places, and since then have been in conversation to attempt birthing a Honeybee Watch regional cell in Kenya. Her insights have been invaluable in getting us to where we are right now. She's been sharing observations, concerns, ambitions, some ideas for solutions, and unbeknownst to her, perhaps, was really the catalyst for today's gathering. So, Nina, from the bottom of my heart, really thank you. Appreciate your support and participation. So Nina originally trained as a lawyer specializing in environmental law, and in 2006 relocated to the east coast of Kenya, where she's been living ever since. She began beekeeping in 2020, focusing on rescuing bee colonies and educating children and communities about their importance. She now manages a small apiary with 12 colonies and produces honey and other wax products from her surrounding pristine environment, so they're probably delicious. She volunteers with permaculture farms and community beekeeping projects, donating rescued bees and training new beekeepers, and additionally consults to the 58,000-acre Old Jogi Conservancy, where she creates apiaries and trains teams with the aim of raising youth awareness about sustainable farming practices in order to protect these essential pollinators. And they're also beginning to locate and monitor the free living colonies that are living on the property. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
The floor is yours.
It was very interesting to have Emmanuel before me, as per, I'm going to go a bit deeper, but it's nice. This is the whole purpose of this meeting, is to understand what are the concerns of others, African country and ours, understanding better if we have the same challenges or not, and helping each other to build up a better sustainable environment for the bees. So I'm going to start. Just going to try and remove. It doesn't matter. I'm going to start just to this document that I found on the internet, which will be shared with you if you want to read the whole study later. But basically, as you can see here, the amount of wild colony per square kilometer in Africa is huge, and also you can see that the managed colonies are minors compared to the wild colony, which is the whole point that Emmanuel also mentioned, is that our colony come from the wild. We don't buy any colony from any other beekeeper. There's no breeding in Kenya, and therefore the wild colony is very important for the commercial beekeeping as well. Now, a question that I can ask myself is, why should we protect honeybee in Africa if they're so abundant? Seems to be swarm everywhere all the time. Why did be monitoring this photo that I have here, a colony that settled on the baobab, and I would just go to work and look at them, and I was very happy to see them grow. And then one day I passed by, probably 3 weeks after they settled, and that's what I saw. I just tried to understand what happened. I started asking questions, and I understand that they have been torched at night with fire. Some of the comb fell off and they were burned. And that's when I really realized that people around me are not scared of bees. I assume that if someone is ready to climb a tree to hunt honey, he's got knowledge. Because if I had no knowledge, I would never come near a bee. I'll be scared. But this is the thing, is that you have people that I would not call beekeeper, and I would not call them bee hunter either, who assume that they can just go and take honey. Obviously, there was no honey because this colony was too young. And it's where my journey started to create awareness around me. Commercial beekeeping in Kenya, it's like, as we said, mainly it starts with the domesticated bees start from the wild. So we have to have catch a box or catch swarm. The amount of hive, what I mean by hive, I mean box, is increasing. As you can see, 14% increase within the last 4 years. But the amount of honey production, it's not meeting the needs of the country, and a lot of honey has to be exported, which to me shows that it doesn't work. With so many wild bees and so many people eager to start apiary, we should have a better production. The photo attached here, it's a lady who started a beekeeping project. I'm not sure how she got the hives, if it was a personal fund or if she has been sponsored, but she had 150 hives for sale. I was working with Sylvie, who's also attending today, and she started a whole beekeeping project in Lamu for mangrove protection. And so we were looking at hives. So I went to see those hives, and I was shocked. Like, she started this apiary in the middle of complete deforested land. There was no bush except really few plants, a few baobab, and she had set up an apiary of 150 hives, planted maybe 30 meters square of lavender. She had invested a lot of money, and obviously, or she has been given a lot of money. Obviously, she had no idea what she was doing, and that was also another reason for me to start being more involved into training, because there was obviously no training for her, and business collapsed. Pesticides in Kenya are becoming a real issue for humans. We don't really know what to eat anymore. The data are really scary. 76% of the chemicals that are used on the crops field are very dangerous for health and obviously biodiversity and the land and the worms and everything. Most of them are banned in Europe. So it seems that Kenya has become a dump for all those chemicals that no one wants to buy in Europe. Lately, we even have some data that there's a decrease of 55% of the importation in Europe of Kenyan crops and flowers, which because they don't meet the health standard. So that shows us that this is also definitely in a few years, as population grow and the need for cultural land expand, this type of pesticide is going to have a huge impact on the wild bees, wild honeybees, but also all the other bees. I just wanted to share with you these images that I took in Oljogi of a hive that has, I think, I'm not a scientist, maybe the veterinarian here could confirm, but the 3 different hives that bees that we have in Kenya. So we have the little black one up, which is the Nicola, which live usually in the higher mountain. Essentially, this one is Mount Kenya. The squitellata, which is a bit bigger with stripes, and the tiny one, which is the Litorea, which is the one we have mainly in Lamu on the coast. They have different behavior traits and also honey production. So it's also interesting to learn more about them to adapt the commercial beekeeping accordingly. Like Emmanuel, I also want to emphasize the defense practice. We had from the person that I've met through my journey in different parts of Kenya, the ancestral beekeeping was very respectful of the colony. People had a few hives, they will harvest for their own needs, they will sell a little bit. There was a very good knowledge of the brood and how it works. Most of the elders that I've talked to will tell you, like, I know I could get to the honey, and when I start seeing baby, I will just stop. I think a lot of the younger generation have witnessed their grandparents doing so, and they kind of understand that there should be some sort of fire and that you take, but I think there's been a gap in between generation, and the young generation actually didn't get properly trained by the elders, because what I've witnessed and what I've understood, because when I go on the ground, I like to ask a lot of questions. Most of the honey hunter will just smoke the hive from the cavity or from the log until all the bees leave all the combs. So the smoking will be very intensive, or they will be burned, and then all the combs will be cut off systematically. And then obviously now we will end up with a swarm again, and that swarm will potentially be able to survive if the queen has not been damaged. So this technique, it used to be very sustainable, but now being applied by the young generation, it's no longer sustainable. I had a training with some rangers at Oljogi last week, and I could see their eyes becoming super big when I tell them that if they kill the queen in the manipulation and remove all the combs, that colony will not survive. That colony has no fresh eggs to raise a new queen, and most likely they will collapse. I realized that they really didn't know, and that's very alarming, because they are destroying wild colony. Now, I want to thank Samson, who allowed me to share this video with you, which is showing how modern hives are being used. This is Tanzania, actually, but in Kenya, it's the same. So we have the top bar hive in trees. And I had a conversation with Sam, and he was like telling me that, yeah, it's very difficult because you need to use proper. Here you can see that all the combs break while the hive was dropped down. And I asked him, I said, well, in this process, do you think the colony was harmed? He said some were harmed and some not. It needs a lot of technique. It's an advantage to keep the hive up, because you protect it from honey badgers and baboon or other human that might thief from your colony. But the whole process of bringing up and down the hive properly needs training. Otherwise, you damage the whole brood and the colony collapse. Another problem that we've met with modern hives in Kenya, since most of the ones that are donated by NGOs are actually Langstroth hive, they are not often built properly, which makes their usage very difficult. They don't close properly, the frames are too long, so the bees don't have a proper space to clean the bottom of the hive. They are not standardized, so box of brood and super would not fit, which creates now holes where the colony can be attacked by other bees. And also those free hives are being given by cooperative to most of the time local community, and their practice can be very abusive. Not all of them, but of course there's some very good cooperative, but some cooperative are very abusive. So they give the hive to the beekeeper, they don't give them proper training, they buy the crude honey from them, which is very little value, and then they make a large profit on the local community, and that's not what I'm trying to do. I think the best is to really train properly local community, maybe even teach them to make their own hive. With hive which are very easy to build. They look like ware hive, and they can be done for less than $10. You have a hive, and you can add boxes and so on. So we're trying to work on more sustainable boxes that people could manage to repair themselves and expand their apiary without having to work with bad equipment. Now, I've mentioned it a little bit, but what I've noticed is a lot of corruption in the way international help is distributed in Kenya. As we saw, Kenya is not producing enough honey. So the door is open to bringing more hive in Kenya, hoping that it will increase the production of honey, which is apparently not the case. And all that equipment is distributed not correctly. Sorry, my English is. So for example, these photos there was a lady who contacted me on WhatsApp, and she's been the beneficiary of a grant from Red Cross. All that equipment she was selling for 250,000 shilling. She has no use of it. So it's shocking to see that so much equipment is being distributed to a lady who don't want to do beekeeping. So there's no follow-up on how the money is spent. There's no consultancy on the viability of the project. One community is going to be given 50 hive when there's not enough food for 50 colony, or it could harm the other local native bees. And then mainly there's no training. People will have a day training, that's it. They'll let them install the hives, and then they'll be left on their own. There's no monitoring. It's not the case for every project again, but a lot of them are being handled that way. And then there's also a sort of corruption as who gets what within the community. So it's a challenge, and I think we put our wild colony in the hands of untrained beekeeper, which is a problem. Now, here are some ideas that I have shared with others in Kenya, and they are just ideas, but how could we improve those techniques to have a sustainable beekeeping practice in Kenya? Maybe there should be a form of license at a symbolic cost. The idea is not for the government to make more money, but to have, like the Ministry of Livestock should know who is having hive in their farm. How are they, like Emmanuel said, they should be veterinarian visits. At the moment, the Ministry of Livestock have no control on the apiary. They don't know who is having bees, and there's no permission for installing large apiary in lands, especially in places where they could be a hazard for the neighbors who could be raising, I don't know, animals. And so we don't have a national beekeeping association in Kenya, which I think it's a very important first step, because they could be involved into how the international help is distributed and make sure the viability of the project is followed up. They could also have control of the cooperative, making sure that they are fair for the community, and also that the bees within this project are handled properly. So these are ideas of how the government willing to increase the honey production could also make sure that the investment made are actually going to be a profit for Kenyans, and also protecting those wild colonies that are going to come into those hives. We've seen the importance of studying African colony, understanding better why they are so resilient. These images are from Oljogi, where I was last week. Thanks to the rangers' cooperation, we've been identifying some nests, so we don't have to do beelining to find the nest of bees. The rangers showed us hives in trees and in rocks. So we hope to follow up this project and have more understanding of. I can see the video is disturbing a bit the quality of the understanding better the habitat, how do they expand with the whole year round flowering, understanding the migration better. What I've seen so far is that only the young colony migrate, the very well-established colony usually don't migrate. Maybe hopefully also be able to cooperate with some institute in Nairobi and have some DNA tests done to understand better the resilience of those colonies. So it's a project that we are starting, but I hope soon it will be a fruitful cooperation with Honeybee Watch. And here is the end of my presentation. So thank you very much. And this is my Instagram over there if you wish to follow me and send me question, inquiry. I will be very happy to answer them.
This was great. Thank you so much, Nina. Always so informative and a great presentation, and really appreciate you showing us the arc of kind of what you've been exposed to. In your short years that you've been working with bees, you've accomplished so much. It's really impressive. You're in the coastal area, and yet I think that your situation applies to so many different situations, and not necessarily just in Kenya, but elsewhere. And in particular, you know that I'm very interested in what you're going to discover at Oljogi, because the 58,000 acres on a wildlife preserve, there's such potential to do the studies. And as I showed a picture of the Blenheim estate where we were visiting with a group and touring those free living colonies, your private estate is, protected, it's got its boundaries, and we see there being great opportunity to go to places like this, to the national forests or to private estates, and do these kind of studies, because you can have access to them, and perhaps there's less managed apiaries and beekeeping around. So thank you for that inspiring talk. We're going to go to our third and final speaker. So we were first introduced to Maina from a colleague from the European Citizen Science Association, who was one of the speakers of December's symposium, which was about communicating and recruiting for citizen science. So Maina is involved in CITSI Africa, which is a citizen science association for the continent. But he holds a PhD in botany, and for the past 30 years has been actively teaching and researching in the area of environmental sustainability, with an emphasis on the nexus of energy, water, and food. And one finding has been that in addition to providing and supporting medicines, forage, and food, beekeeping has been a key feature in the interaction of communities that utilize plant resources to enhance their livelihood. He's conducted trainings in enhancing the honey value chains for local beekeepers, and is the president of CITSI Africa, which he will talk about. They are a continent-wide association that spreads awareness of citizen science and tries to involve regular people like everyone here in collecting quality data. So if you are ready, I'm going to give you a timer of 14 minutes.
Thank you, Steve.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, and I'm very appreciative of everybody who has stand up to listen to the panel today. Lastly, also appreciative of both Emmanuel and Nina and the work that you presented. And there are some dovetails, there's some place with dovetail, and that is always a good thing, especially when you've had three speakers who have been chosen independent of one another, and you find the information really fits together. So talking from the point of view of what I want to present today, I'm hoping that it's going to move as I try to look at 1, 2, 3, there it is. Steve, confirm that you have also moved it from your side?
Yes, it has advanced.
Okay, so very briefly, I just want to give an opportunity for people to know something about the Seeds Africa Association, and then touch on more or less the ecology of African ecosystems, which has been alluded to, looking at the bee from an African eye, just sharing a bit of results from a quickfire interview that we have done over the last 2 weeks, mainly in different parts of Kenya, using a lot of the youth that I've worked and interacted with. Emmanuel has given quite some compelling reasons why we need to conserve the free living colonies. And just lastly, to suggest a way in which citizen science can help to ensure the sustainability of the free living bee colonies. Now, just for a quick brief on citizen science, a very young association formed in 2017. Every other year, Kenya is lucky to host the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, and they hold an assembly. Now, I caught up with the UNEP when it was held in 2017. And here is when I came to learn that there are continents which already have very established citizen science associations, including the European Citizen Science, the Citizen Science of America, which changed to Association for Advancing Participatory Science, Australian Citizen Science Association, and CITSA Asia. And so we were all launched around that time with registration under the university USIUA, where I teach. Now, even more recent is what we call the Global Citizen Science Partnership, which was done in 2019 and finally registered in Austria in 2022. So from a point of view of a continental association, we were pretty late. But in terms of joining the Global Citizen Science, at least we were registered by the time it was made official. Now, that's my physical address. CITSA Africa, for those of you who have begun associations, you know it takes quite a bit of funding to get your website going. So we've got, right now we're on skystarter.org, which anybody can get that, with an ambition to set up by our own website by October 2025. I'm very happy to see a wide variety of participants from different parts of Africa, and I would encourage you to get into that website. Hopefully the Secretariat has loaded the joining form, because one of the things we aim to do is to provide a platform on which people can find other people who are doing something. One of the things that is very typical, and it's not really an accusation, but it's just the way it is that finding data, finding organizations tends to be very difficult within the continent, simply because we don't have a platform on which we can put a lot of the things. So this would be also a very nice platform which I can offer for the coordination of bee activities and to get to know one another. And if anybody is interested and wants to come in, can quickly just look at that citizen science platform and see what sort of projects are in different parts of Africa and whoever is in charge of it. Now, let us look at citizen science. Let's use the European Union definition as any activity that involves the public in scientific research and has the potential to bring together science policymakers and society as a whole. Its major strength is the length of time which it can go on. And of course, if we're talking about Africa, the geographical spread of that data is enormous and very beneficial for us. So at the end, I'll touch a bit again on on that aspect of it. Now, for this I think has been talked about. This is more of the science of it. Obviously, we can't gainsay the pollination activities of the bees. We can't underestimate what happens with agriculture. And this is one of the worrying things, is that as much as we are talking about the bees disappearing in Africa, most of which are wild, we have a very big emphasis on food security. So it becomes paradoxical that we worry about food security, but at the same time, we don't worry about the pollinators who are making sure that the food gets onto our plates. So it will be interesting to know, and what in terms of FAO estimating that 90% of the world's food production comes from bees, what aspects of the free living colonies represent that? And from the numbers Nina gave us, I think it is quite significant, no doubt, especially for Africa. Now, obviously, we get a lot of sustained economy and social benefits along the SDG lines. The very fact that you can sell your honey from a local setting means that you are meeting, there's some money in the home, and at a very basic need, you're meeting the nutritional needs of the households. Figures, and my apologies, I didn't put the references there. We have about 60%, just Kenya alone, 60% of people eating 1 meal a day. That already compromises the health, it compromises the life expectancy. And I think with the free living colonies, we also have an incentive for sustainable land management practices. The bee is an indicator species, so the presence or absence really shows us the health of that particular society. And we can extend this to measure the impacts of environmental stress. And also one of the topics that's giving us a lot of worries is around climate change. And if the bees then are an indicator, that is one of the things we can use to tell us how it's going on. Now, I miss this in Africa. We used to harvest, we dance. Babies were born, we danced. People got married, we danced. That part we still do. I personally have not danced in a long time because of any harvest. Now, with bees, therefore, there's a lot of symbolic nature about them in terms of what they bring, what swarms represent in terms of the ancestors, and the pure strength and abilities to work as a team that bees carry out their work with. And that it really becomes worth following. Now, just to share, I just created a few questions, send them out. I aimed for the semi-arid areas. I aimed for in the northeastern part of Kenya. I aimed for the subhumid regions around the lake. And just for comparison, I also took some of the questionnaires into a low-income settlement within the capital city of Nairobi. So let me just share with you, just enjoy the outcomes, and you might be able to relate to some of this within your own settings. Now, one of the first questions that I just asked them is, well, I have to move things around here a bit. Just to see how many times a day do you see free living bees? Now, a bee is a very small thing, and it can pass so quickly. And if you're out in the open, you might miss it. But very interestingly, quite a number of people are able to see it every other day, and an 8% never saw anything, never see anything, so to speak. Were there any nets? If so, if yes, where? Trees really are the main thing. And because the questionnaire was also in the settlement areas, we had buildings and where possible gardens and streetlights. So for urban people, look at the streetlights. Bees swarm a lot. And of course, once in a while. Are the bees in your region aggressive? Sometimes, few times. And I got the feeling that people were sympathetic with the bees because, I mean, we can't blame them for being aggressive. They do carry a very beautiful product, honey, which everybody wants. They have got the young, and they have the queen to protect. But the ultimate thing is the aggression comes in when they're disturbed. The plants they frequent most, sunflower and wild plants were up there, but sunflower seems to be a very attractive thing. Fruit trees, ornamentals, and vegetables. Yep.
Maina, can I interrupt you? I think we're stuck on one of your slides, and
Which
I
one is
know
that one? Where are we stuck?
we're stuck on how many times a day do you see free living bees, but I know that you have a slide about sunflowers and
It's moving on my side. Is it not moving that side? Let me go
it's
back.
not. Maybe you could stop sharing and start again.
Okay. My apologies for that. This is a, could we say, the problem of technology?
Aha, yes. So now we're at where were there any nests in sight? And if so, yes, where?
Let me know if it moves.
Now
Was
it's
there some
moving.
movement?
How often do you see swarms of bees? Yes.
Are bees in your region aggressive?
Yes, exactly.
Which types of plants do they visit frequently?
Yes, I think that's where you are now.
I think I need to keep moving, otherwise when I stop to
Okay.
talk.
Yes.
So the next slide, ladies and gentlemen, we just have the reasons why bees are important: pollination, collecting honey, local crops, providing food, plant pollination, and medicinal aspects. Especially people identify the honey that comes from underground, the bees, and also a light variety that we have, particularly in the semi-arid areas, is very valid for medicinal. Now, Steve, it has changed to all free living bees decreasing or increasing?
Yes.
Yes. And the response was generally decreasing. And I think people answered according to their lifespan, what they saw before and what they're seeing. Pesticides, which have been talked about, are really blamed for that. Reduction of flowers. Climate change, particularly in the semi-arid areas, the responses were the serious droughts. When they have serious droughts, bees migrate and move away. The loss of trees, which are being cut down for charcoal because people are looking for energy, and also land clearing. The measures to protect: planting more flowers, planting more trees, reducing climate change, rehabilitating degraded areas, and like the old jogi, that is admirable with those 58,000 acres. So people feel that we need more natural areas to be kept. And very important, community sensitization and awareness, especially on the free living colonies. Now, so this just summarizes the same things we've talked about with the discussions around the aggressive behavior of bees only when they're disturbed, and the use of pesticides. And so I had an example from a more recent example from one of the areas where there was a locust invasion, and the locusts were cleared using pesticides. And when they had cleared the locusts, there were no bees. And the same applies when there's mechanical spraying of pesticides in agricultural crops. So just to quickly look at some of the challenges, obviously, the damaging of the wild hives to killing the bee colonies. Whenever we're interacting with the bees as humans, how can we ensure that the outcome is positive? Land is also shrinking. There's a lot of parceling of land. In many of the rural areas, there's a lot of land use changes with land going into urban areas. Synthetic sprays we've talked about, climate and lack of awareness in communities. And do we really yet have that coordinated, concerted effort around policies to protect the free living colonies? And so lastly, I would just like to propose how citizen science can contribute to the FLC sustainability effort, and Steve will confirm whether the slide is apt. Are we on education awareness?
Yes.
Yes. So top of the list, education and awareness, so that we promote and conserve free living colonies. And this has been well covered by both Nina and the previous speaker from Ghana. So that is very important. Data collection and research, I think we can have a big contribution from the citizens across the whole of Africa. We can get people to identify nesting site, monitor colony survival, information on how long those colonies are living and the dynamics around them, what are their foraging habits, what is the periodic reports on the status of the land around them. And in Kenya, we have a concept we're starting called green schools. And one big thing in those green schools will be a small weather station so that people can start relating temperature changes, rainfall amounts to reality. So if I tell you we had 10 millimeters of rain, everybody in that area can understand. So that's what 10 millimeters means. I think that is lacking quite a bit. So we can undertake research on the different colonies with the citizens. We can do that interaction with people who are not necessarily from their communities, but are concerned about the bees. And that will deepen their understanding by meeting the stakeholders. And the most powerful part actually is policy influence. Once you capture anything in a policy, that is a permanent record. Government after government will follow that policy. And so this is one of the things that we really must relate citizen science to, being able to that. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. I've just put out my contact there in case anybody wants to get in touch. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Maina. If you could stop sharing your screen, great. I love how the three presentations really progressed from, kind of veterinarian's perspective and what's happening in Ghana to Nina's experience in Kenya, and Maina really looking at more kind of continent-wide and the potential for citizen science to raise awareness, educate people, and get people involved in science and conservation. So going from the microcosm to the macro, and we would love to partner with your organization on having a presence in Africa. So thank you to our three speakers. This has been great. What I'd like to do is pass the microphone to Arrigo, who will ask a couple of questions. We have about 10 minutes or so for audience questions. And then if our three speakers can stay here and answer them.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Just as a brief introduction, I'm at the other side of the event here. So I'm mostly managing the background in the Zoom logistics, but I'm also part of Honeybee Watch. I'm Rodrigo. I've been introduced very quickly in the beginning, but just to say that I'm going to be covering this part of the Q&A, and also later we are going to have some part on how to a more interactive part, let's say, with you participants. Now, what I want to say is that I'm very happy to see there have been many questions for the speakers. And because we have limited time, at least in this first part, I'm probably gonna just summarize them, and I'm gonna extract some of those that I think are more relevant and that are in a way tie more precisely what has been discussed until now. So I apologize in advance if I'm not able to cover your question, but you can still ask them in the chat, and again, we may have time in the second part of the event. I see that in general there have been some question and some concern regarding to the knowledge of any initiative for the conservation of bees in the particular regions where Nina, Maina, and Emmanuel are based in. So in particular, Zeudu Hora was asking, and again, I'm sorry for the pronunciation if I'm not pronouncing the name correctly, but it seems that beekeepers in Ghana, and this is directed to Emmanuel's presentation, depend very much on on swarms from wild colonies for their managed apiaries. So do you know, Emmanuel, if there is any strategy in conserving those sources of free-living colonies or wild colonies in general? I know that you work in a veterinary institute. Maybe is there something related to that?
As I've mentioned, there is that dependence on the wild, and then also, so beekeepers are actually the ones, and then bee scientists have been the ones kind of championing the cause of trying to protect bees and the importance of bees. And there are also a number of environmental organizations, and then organizations that are also into nature-based beekeeping. Example is, I think I see one in the comment, Bee for Development. One staff from there mentioned that, and yes, I've worked with Bee for Development. I know in their area, they are located around the Afram Plains area in Ghana, and then they do help people to use local materials to construct local hives. Yes, so there's been that effort, but it's not like a national or government efforts to kind of protect bees, which the beekeeping community are kind of trying to work locally through the Forestry Commission and other allied organizations that are linked to the government, so that that can become a national policy that can be championed, like conserving ecological sites and areas that also beekeepers can use to do beekeeping, and also protecting the wild population. Yeah.
Thank you, Manuel. And to that note, maybe for anybody who knows or any initiative that works on protecting bees, conserving bees, or is trying to do science or any conservation action on bees, maybe, and that you know of, maybe you can share them in the chat as it's been done for Bees for Development, so that we're able to connect you with those initiatives. And another question for you, Emmanuel, that actually came up from Jamal. He noticed actually that 94% of beekeepers were using transitional hives, as you highlighted in your presentations. And he was curious about the fact of whether those choices are coming from that's fruit of a personal choice, or is it part of a broader strategy? For example, in terms of government, for example, is there the government giving subsidies for those particular hives, or is there because of again a personal choice because they're easy to use? Do you have any knowledge about it?
What I can say is there's been a lot of more beekeeping training programs that are being undertaken by development partners and also NGOs that try to train local communities on like livelihood empowerment programs. And most of these usually use the transitional hives. Some of them, and as I mentioned, the Bee for Development is one particular one that is prominent in Ghana. They try to help communities to rather use local materials that are available in their settings, and how to use those ones to make their hives. And so those ones, you see that most of them will be traditional hives. But in the areas that this work was conducted, most of the beekeepers in that area, and as I said, with the history that I've presented, the transitional hive was something that was instituted, brought into the country, and that actually led into commercial beekeeping. So that became like more like those that are into commercial beekeeping, they tend to use more of the transitional hive. But individuals and communities that are being trained, you find that individuals will still have traditional hives attached to having the transitional hive, and majority of them are transitional hives. Yes.
Thank you very much, Manuel. Very much detail here. And then a few questions also for Nina that came up, and one actually that, well, in general also, some of them that are more or less around the same topic of before regarding the conservation of bees. And in particular, if you know, you mentioned the problem in pesticides and the fact of the chemicals being used on crops that may be harmful for bees. Do you know of any initiative in your area that are maybe trying to mitigate those damages in some way, maybe directly to bees? Anything that again could be useful that we can share here that could be useful for anybody to go and check?
No, Lamu area is not really an agriculture area. It's very dry. We are semi-arid, so we have like rainy season farming activity for over like 3 months, but the rest of the year we have 9 months without rain. So it's compared to upcountry. I think I'm not the best person to talk about that. I think around Nairobi, in the whole area of Nyeri, they are bigger production. Here it's very small portion of land, but the usage of, there's no, you see, you go to any agro shop and you buy this very poisonous chemical, And yeah, I mean, there's a big misuse of the chemical, at least for what I've witnessed around me. I don't think I've ever lose a colony to that. I've lose a colony to robbing bees, but not to because they do mainly mice, so bees go on it, but not so much. So yeah, in my area, no, I've never seen the government involved into trying to emphasize the limitation of pesticides. No.
I think I can just jump in and help Nina there also.
Sure.
Coming from a lot of the agricultural areas, I think Nina is right. There's no intentional effort to stop any chemical use. Chemicals, particularly in Kenya, they're sold in what we call agrovets, and these are increasing in number. The only item that makes people stop using a chemical is, as Nina said, where you have a lot of European, the most profitable farming agribusiness is when you take your product to a distant market like Europe or Asia. When a certain chemical is listed as dangerous and not acceptable, that's normally an incentive for people to stop using that chemical. But for the local market, we have such a direct consumer to market transfer that there's not enough checks in between that will give people motive not to use a chemical. Ultimately, the farmer is so afraid of losing their yield that they're pretty ready to use anything to ensure that the crop survives and they get their profit without minding too much about the impact they're having on the bees, the environment, and also the consumers themselves.
A question that I have I think would probably be interesting for all three speakers was actually if you have any knowledge or what kind of role the indigenous communities are playing in gathering your research, or at least are you connected to any indigenous research, any indigenous communities, and are they, for example, sharing any knowledge with you? Are you in contact with them, and what kind of role are they playing in your initiative in general?
And I think I don't know, Nina, we had this discussion with you. The description of indigenous, it's always a tricky one. For example, an initiative that I'm involved in right now involves the conservation of the Marsabit forest. And there's a lot of, I would call them local. Instead of indigenous, I say the local. There's a lot of the local communities who have interacted with that forest for generations. We are looking at conserving the whole forest as a whole. One of the questions that was asked, how do you conserve bees? It has to be by conserving the environment. But the community has a lot of socioeconomic pressures. One of the things that comes out very easily from a forest is the timber for use or for burning the trees as charcoal, which is then going to be used in the community. So now, in this particular research, we are working with the communities. Having discussed with Steve, the bees have become one of the major things. So we're creating an app which will be used to track a number of the things in there. Also, and this is always an investment, is to get the young people at two stages, at three stages, primary, secondary, and tertiary, and ensure that the message that we want to pass, whether it's around bees, whether it's around the plants themselves, comes up from that area. We do have other indigenous groups. We actually have a particular group that relies on honey in the traditional sense as one of their main. And I don't think they've been treated too well in the forest, in the Mao forest where they live. And there are always issues around that. One of the temptations, and it comes a lot, is that we tend to approach with a top-down, bring in the bees getting lost. Nobody must cut trees anymore. Nobody must do this and that. Don't use this and then, but then we forget that why are they using that? And that's why we are really advocating for something like citizen science. What is it that is causing this kind of situation? How can we involve the indigenous people? What is the knowledge? What is the right way? And when you come to technology, how can we generate it starting from the level of the community? upwards. So yes, if it's not happening, yes, indigenous communities must be involved in all that research. And in whichever country we are in Africa, however learned we are, however much we have done our research in our universities, our institutions, put all that aside for the time being, and then go to the communities and just find out, what are your ideas? Are we doing the right thing? How do we conserve? That's my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Maina.
Me, I would just like to add, so in Lamu, the same project has been established for protecting the mangrove area. Mangrove is used mainly here as poles for construction. So it's quite well managed by the Kenyan government, the forestry department. So they give permit for cutting mangrove, and areas are protected, and then they move forward to another one. But obviously a lot of logging is being done illegally. And so the beekeeping project that was started there was essentially to offer the hives to population that are close to the mangrove, so that they actually benefit from the mangrove being preserved, because they have their bees and they harvest honey from the mangrove. So like Maina was saying, the idea is just to always come close to the population and understand what are their needs and how can we mitigate both interests without come and detect a way to go, because that's never work. So this is the same experience, but with mangrove.
Yes, and just to add to that, so in Ghana, yes, the beekeeping community tries to engage all stakeholders, and as I mentioned, there's always that plan to work with the Forestry Commission so that areas that needs protection, then the beekeeping can be done there, and then that in a way provides income to people, and also like helps to protect those forest community reserves to prevent encroachment and then entering of people into those areas. And one other thing in terms of agriculture is that beekeeping and then the research being done with bees is helping to they are incorporating it into the cashew plantation, which is found in the Bono and Bono areas, and where they incorporate and advocate that farmers add beekeeping into their plantation activities, which serves both to kind of help increase their yield and also to kind of just conserve bees and then protect bees in those areas. And by putting bees there, there's that effort of educating them not to spray with harmful chemicals, because that will also be affecting the bees. So I think there is various levels of engagement that has been done with or engaging the communities around to in their own ways to get involved in protecting bees and bee populations. And also with the research that is being done in the university, we also try to understand, we, as I said, from the veterinary background, are interested in the diseases and pests that affect bees. And in doing that, we not just try to tell them what they should do, but also try to understand what are the local management practices that they use in case they have certain pests and certain diseases that they have in their operations, that is in the commercial apiaries that they have. So we try to understand that and also try to investigate if there are organic ways that local farmers can use instead of trying to bring them foreign and by chemicals, which may end up affecting the bees. Yeah.
There's so much to talk about. Wow, so much information. I don't know if people are paying attention to the chat, but there's lots of information that's being exchanged. And I see, for instance, that there are different representatives from Bees for Development, Janet from the kind of international team, Papa from the Ghana team, and I believe somebody from Uganda is here as well, and possibly even Ethiopia. So, you know, if you are interested, you can start connecting via these kind of little chats. As the questions have demonstrated, there's a lot of curiosity. There's so many different topics that we could be talking about today. There's lots to discuss. Unfortunately, we have to move on because we are pressing against time. So what I would like, so first of all, thank you to Nina, Emmanuel, and Maina for your presentations and for your answers. Thank you for the people who have been asking the questions. This has been basically the first half of our event. And what I would like to do is go to our quote unquote participatory section. And I'm going to be starting by presenting what we heard from you already. For those of you who filled out our pre-event questionnaire. So we issued, when you registered, we issued a questionnaire. We had 184 people register, and 84 of you actually filled out the pre-event questionnaire as of yesterday. So thank you for your participation. It's almost 50%, and we're just astounded by how many people actually took the time. So what we wanted to know when we issued this is to get to know you individually a little better. We asked some questions about who you are and what your connection to bees are. But more importantly, we wanted to have a better understanding of kind of the collective feelings about the opportunities and challenges and needs in relation to studying and protecting free-living honeybees in Africa. So the answers that you gave helped shape the participatory part of today's event, which we'll get to right after this. So we purposely took a SWOT approach, SWOT, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, but adapted it accordingly. And this is a common exercise in kind of marketing and strategy and kind of branding schools and courses. And it's to better analyze a situation to understand what's possible, what's not, what things you need to avoid, how you can possibly proceed. And so that was why we asked these certain questions. So we hope that you'll agree that these kind of generalized answers are representative of the free-living colony situation and potential in Africa. And just a couple of stats. We only had 300 people that we invited to participate in this event. We had 184 people register, which is more than 50%, 55%. And of those, like I said, 84 of you answered the questionnaire. So that's about 45, 46%. If you did not fill out the questionnaire and you would like to, you can take a snapshot of that QR code in the bottom right corner and you can fill it out. It's still open and your answers are still very much welcome. What we learned and heard from you, we asked a couple questions about you specifically. Of those 84, we had 19 countries represented, but of the 184 registrants, we had 24 countries represented. And here from the answers, Kenya was the top with 15, Ethiopia with 8, and Egypt, Rwanda, and Nigeria with 7. So it's very exciting for us to see that there's, out of the 54 countries on the continent, 24 of them are represented today. So that's a great start. We asked about what languages you are fluent and or comfortable speaking. No surprise, English, French, and Arabic were the common languages. And we were really impressed by how many bi and trilingual speakers there are amongst us here. And many of them were speaking multiple local languages. We asked what your areas of expertise were. So more than 70% of you are involved in beekeeping, which we'll dive into in a second. 62% were scientists and or involved in academia, which I'll also drill down into a little further afterwards. 50% were involved in conservation of natural resources, 24% in forestry, parks, and environmental management, 21% farming, and 16% in government and policy. So the composition of our group is really representative of the bee kind of world, which is beekeepers, scientists researching them, foresters who might be managing their habitat areas, farmers who are benefiting from their pollination services, and of course, conservation, which is ultimately the end goal, ideally, which is making sure that these populations are protected. And government are the ones who implement these policies or enact these policies and help implement them. So, this is kind of a cross-section of how you could formulate your Honeybee Watch regional team, which is, obviously some scientists and beekeepers, people from the forests, farming, conservation, and politics. Of the 52 of you who said that you were involved in science or academia, we had responses. Again, you were allowed to, it was open-ended, so you could specify what you wanted, or we had different categories. So there's lots of overlap. 20 of you were involved in bees and pollination, 13 entomologists, 11 involved in conservation and biodiversity, 8 in agriculture, 7 sustainability. We had biologists, ecologists, forestry people, economists even, life sciences. So again, very kind of broad scope of the types of sciences that are represented here today. And then for the 59 of you who identified as being involved in beekeeping, we asked what type of beekeeping you practice. And again, there's overlap. You could select more than one of these answers. The majority, 75%, do it for conservation and ecological purposes, which we're really pleased to see. 63% for rural development and educational purposes. 42% are semi-professional, which we defined as you're selling products for profit. And then both pollination services and honey harvest for personal consumption were tied at 25%. And 5%, 5 of you, 8%, do it as a hobby. And then lastly, we asked a question of whether or not you would be willing to share your contact information. And because what we're trying to do is really connect you, we thought if we created some profile directory, like a LinkedIn, this is my LinkedIn profile here, that shares your name, where you're located, maybe what your expertise are, what your interests are, contact information, people could start connecting so that, for instance, the Egyptians or the Kenyans can meet up and strategize on ways to collaborate. So of everybody asked, 98% of you said yes. So we're very optimistic that this is indicative of people's willingness to and desire to connect. We would love some help putting this directory together. So if you would like to, we'll ask for volunteers later. So moving on to the next section was about you and your relationship to free living colonies. 56% of you said that you have experience either studying or working with them. And among those, 38% are currently studying and or working with free living colonies. So I guess this is not really that big of a surprise because in Africa, free living colonies are really omnipresent. However, in comparison to Europe, where they're much less common, this is really impressive to see that so many people have been working with and or studying them. About you and citizen science, almost 60% of you have experience working with citizen scientists or working on a citizen science project. And, that's really interesting to us because obviously Honeybee Watch is citizen science based. But we would love to know more about your experiences and expertise and whether you'd be willing to bring those to your projects and ultimately to Honeybee Watch. What's really encouraging as well is that when asked if you would lead a project in your area or country, 77% of you said yes. Only 5% said no, and the rest, it was a kind of a conditional yes, maybe, or you consider it depending on factors like time availability, funding, staff support, etc. So now we get to the juicy parts where we asked you about the challenges and opportunities and needs related to citizen science and free living colonies. These were all open-ended questions, which are difficult to summarize. It's not like I can just hit a button and process all the multiple choice answers. It's also more difficult to visualize, so we don't have nice, pretty pie charts here. But we did try to make kind of broad generalizations of the answers. So when asked about the challenges for citizen science projects in Africa, we kind of summarized it into 2 groups. Related to people, there are cultural differences. You have multiple languages, poor, inconsistent internet or electricity. These are real infrastructural kind of barriers. So yes, we understand that impedes one's ability to conduct citizen science. People were questioning, how do you coordinate a nationwide or region-wide research study with limited resources and vast expanses? Trust issues. People may be skeptical of science or fear that they're going to be exploited. It's probably happened before. So we definitely want to be communicative. But what's really important is to build this relationship and to make sure that there's an equal exchange whereby they're providing you with data, but in exchange, you're providing them with findings. So you're sharing the science and also maybe including them in trainings and or workshops. And then also long-term engagement is difficult. So, how do you convince people to participate? How do you incentivize them to do it regularly? So we're asking people to monitor these colonies at least 4 times annually and needing to convey what's in it for them. And the second grouping is about data. There's no guarantee that the quality is going to be reliable. And so what's really interesting and important is that citizen scientists need to be trained properly so that the data that they provide is reliable. And we do this often by standardizing protocols and providing informational sessions. So these are things that we as Honeybee Watch could guide you on. And that's also part of the quid quo pro between organizers and participants. Answers to what opportunities, we group these into 2. The applications related to science. So obviously for the genetic diversity and understanding the ecological systems and interactions between the bees and the trees and other animals, including us humans, we're part of this ecosystem. To inform and possibly influence efforts in conservation. I think one of our presenters had talked about this earlier. And then to better understand the bee biology, the ecology, the health, et cetera, on a global scale, and really involving people from Africa in a international conversation. Because from our perspective and the little exposure that we've had so far, that not much is known about the free living colonies specifically in Africa, and we would love to help you to basically disseminate the science and the findings outwards. I think a lot of people, especially in Europe, would be fascinated by what's happening there and could learn a lot from what's happening in your local communities. And then the applications practically of empowering local communities with economic resources. This is something that Bees for Development, for instance, is committed to. Improving beekeeping sustainability. Nina spoke about this, where the local kind of traditional beekeeping is not necessarily sustainable, especially with honey hunting. And then showing respect for the traditional methods and perhaps helping to improve them and become more sustainable too. And then the challenges related to free living colonies and studying and protecting them. Again, a quote that resonated: there are significant negative human-related impacts such as deforestation, agricultural expansion, urbanization, unsustainable traditional honey harvesting practices, the human-wildlife conflicts, people are afraid of stings, the widespread and often unregulated use of pesticides. This has all been discussed before. And beyond those environmental threats, there are infrastructural and situational challenges to the study and protection of these bees. Infrastructurally, there's limited resources like funding for research and buying lab equipment, or even getting to and from remote areas. There are transportation costs. There's also a lack of baseline data. We don't necessarily know what the population distribution is, the density, the survival rates. So we need to kind of understand that and get that baseline. And then, to do the consistent monitoring, it's difficult. The locations are remote. It takes time and effort to get there 4 times a year. That could be kind of a stress on some people and participants. And then situationally, people generally don't know about the importance of free living colonies or may think that it's an unlimited resource. Maina had interviewed some Kenyan beekeepers, and they basically all of them said that they were noticing the decline in the numbers. And I had a conversation with somebody in Ethiopia the other day who I think might be here at Tibibu. And what he was saying is that back in the day, you put out a bait hive to capture a swarm, and it would be populated in a day or 2. And now it's taking maybe a week or longer. So people might not know what the situation is. And then logistically, there's lots of kind of challenges such as multiple languages to potentially include in your study or your region, different cultures to adapt to, and of course, these huge distances. And then when asked about the greatest needs, again, we grouped it into 3 groups. Infrastructure, no surprise that people said that they need money and resources like standardized protocols, training of researchers and citizen scientists. In regard to capacity building, people identified needing help with research skills, learning best practices, both on the continent and beyond, and conservation strategies. So, once we have the science, then what? So how do you reach policymakers? How do you protect them? How do you enforce this? How do you partner with the right people? And then building systems for comparable research and data collection. So making sure that the data that you're collecting is useful for other scientists on the continent and beyond. In the second grouping, it's related to people. Again, can't emphasize enough the necessity of building community, collaborating with local leaders, and engaging stakeholders for sustained amount of times. And when you make these investments, it results in the trust that we were talking about earlier, about the challenge of fear of science and or being exploited. But when you invest in these communities, that's when the trust and the awareness and the commitment kind of grows. And then making sure that there are these reciprocal exchanges, such as skill building, economic empowerment. And then related to conservation, developing and implementing national and regional laws and regulations to protect the bees and their habitats, to restrict the harmful agrochemicals that, as Nina pointed out, are spreading from Europe and beyond. When they have prohibited them, they export them elsewhere, which is not necessarily a good thing. And then promoting sustainable land use and advocating to integrate free living colony conservation into broader environmental and agricultural policies, because the bees have connections to the forest, they have connections to the farms, and they just don't operate in isolation. So how can the conservation efforts be connected to agriculture and forestry? And then wrapping up, we asked you what you would like to get out of this working webinar. There are a lot of kind of wishes for this. And in practical sense, there's only so much we can accomplish in 3 hours. And initially, our real kind of primary objective was to connect you, to connect the speakers to one another, to connect you to them and their topics, to connect you with one another in the chat especially, and most importantly, afterwards. So if we can build a directory, if you can start contacting one another and exploring what is important to you and how you might want to organize locally or regionally to build a regional cell, that's what we're hoping to accomplish today. You wanted to know more about free living colonies, population dynamics, ecology, behavior, genetic diversity, their overall health, threats, and resilience. So we're hoping that through the conversations that have been presented already and a panel that will follow, that you'll learn more about free living colonies and get that kind of knowledge acquisition. And as for the rest, research and project development, again, we encourage you to connect afterwards. Maybe practical skills and tools for action can be, in the future when we have funding and we can organize training sessions and or workshops. And then farther down, sustainable development and policy, we kind of see that as maybe a 5-year, 10-year goal. The last slide here is we asked people whether or not you'd be willing to or interested in contributing. And there was a great response. So we're very excited about this. 82% of you said you'd be willing to promote a project in your network. 72% said you could oversee and manage the science aspects. 71% could collect data. 59% could organize and manage a regional cell. Between 59% organizing it and 82 promoting it and 72 managing it, it looks like there are a lot of people who would like to work with Honeybee Watch or work independently. We encourage that too. 57% recruit citizen scientists, 53% liaise with local leaders and stakeholders to build a community. Nearly half said they could help with communications, lobbying, and media, and 40% with fundraising and grant writing. So all of this is very promising, and it would propel this dream of establishing these regional cells and making that become a reality. We can use all the help that we can get, but it's not about us, Honeybee Watch, getting help. It's more about you getting inspired, getting organized, designing studies that are relevant to your community's needs and your needs, maybe as a scientist and or a beekeeper, and then coming to Honeybee Watch with direction or a plan or an idea and seeing where we can support what you're doing. And that's really what role we would like to play. So that concludes the questionnaire. And what we're going to do next, Arrigo, is we are going to issue a poll.
Yes.
So
So
if you would like
yeah.
to present that.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, actually. Yeah, so as you just heard from Steve, one of the main aim of this pre-event survey, the sort of question that we sent you before, was actually to understand your concern in regard to free living colonies and understand, especially if you share challenges and that how we can actually take action for that. And in a way, we want to get deeper, a little bit deeper in those answers, and we would like to see if we can get some objectives or some general direction that we could follow maybe in the future and to take action and how we can take action towards those objectives and let's say an orientation in general. I created a very brief poll. Any participation will really much help us and understand what kind of next step we can take. So is there more a need to connect you? Is there more a need to create another event like this one? Shall we pursue any fundraising or any project related to that? Thank you very much.
So I would like to call out two people in our audience to unmute themselves, which would be David and Nicola. And then Nina, Maina, and Emmanuel. At this point, we'll moderate a panel discussion amongst our three speakers and then two very special guests whom I will introduce. Many of you will know both of them. First, we have Nicola Bradbear, whose career has spanned decades and impresses at every point along the way. She's based in the UK. She's a beekeeper and worked for the International Bee Research Association with Ava Crane, lectured about bees at Cardiff University, and then founded Bees for Development in 1993. Over its 30 years, Bees for Development has worked in 50 countries, advocating simple methods for nature-based apiculture to support biodiversity and provide sustainable incomes for families in remote locations. And additionally, she's formerly chaired the Rural Development Commission for Apimonia, which is the International Federation of Beekeeping Associations. So thank you, Nicola, for joining our panel. And our next special guest is David Mukomana, also connected to Apimonia, currently serving as its president of the Regional Commission for Africa. And among other accomplishments, he founded and serves as managing director of a company specializing in honey processing, beekeeping, and beekeeping training and consultancy in Zimbabwe and the surrounding area. He's worked on regional structures to accelerate development in the apiculture sector and is currently working to create partnerships with development agencies and institutions of higher learning to support beekeeping with research needed to unpack the intrinsic value of African honeys. So thank you for being part of our panel. So what we were hoping is in this section, we have about 30 minutes. We want to spark dialogue amongst you. So to begin, This is for David and Nicola in particular, since both of you have continent-wide perspectives and experiences. In your opinion, do you feel that these case studies from Ghana and Kenya that Nina and Emmanuel presented here, do you feel that they're representative of the wider situation in Africa?
Okay, well, if I go first, if that's all right, David. Nina, I was very interested to hear your talk, and what you reported is really reflected the situation as it has been in Africa for some time, really, and a big problem and confusion that is caused with people promoting foreign beekeeping that is not appropriate for tropical African honeybees. So it's a continuing problem that doesn't seem to go away, but we don't help ourselves because even in the conversation today, the vocabulary that we use for beekeeping does not help us. Why do we continue talking about efficient, effective, sustainable, economic, viable, highly productive, highly commercial, useful beekeeping on which millions of Africans today, right now, today, are making a livelihood? That's not something traditional, that is modern beekeeping. And what you sometimes some of our community refer to as modern beekeeping is using hives that were invented nearly 200 years ago and do not work with tropical African honeybees. And it's difficult for us to have conversations with people outside the beekeeping community if we ourselves persist in using this inaccurate and unscientific language. So I would really like to see a tightening of vocabulary when we discuss the African beekeeping sector and abandon talking about traditional beekeeping. Let's talk about fixed comb, economic, sustainable, effective, ecological, environmentally beneficial, fabulous beekeeping. Let's talk about that. And let's talk about frame hive beekeeping and that it does not work with tropical African honeybees for many reasons. For many reasons, it doesn't fit with many communities. And let's talk about top bar hive beekeeping. I think if we could standardize the vocabulary, it would be really helpful to our sector.
Yeah, I know that you've been a proponent of that for many years, and I fall into the trap of saying traditional, and I should get a slap on the wrist for that. So my apologies, and I need to correct myself. But David, do you have a comment about the representation of Ghana and Kenya?
Yes, no, thank you very much, Steve. And it's so wonderful to connect with my mentor, Nicola. You know, I have learned a lot from her. I have inherited a lot of guts, let me put it that way, from her. And I don't think I would be able to have a spine in the Apimondia executive world if it did not been because of the encouragement and the strength that I got from Nicola. You have done a fantastic job, and not only from developing the African beekeeping and communities, but even in terms of projecting the voice of the African beekeeper. I will not take anything from what Nicola has said, especially in terms of the perception that have been created that anything that is to do with Africa and African beekeeping, and including the bees, is kind of traditional. It's a problematic. You know, there's need to have importation of the supposedly friendly colonies. Yes, the presentation from Emmanuel relating to importation of colonies in 1960 is it was the same across Africa. Many African countries that have been colonized also had even bees being colonized, in the sense that we had to had colonies brought. A classic example is Mozambique, where we had colonies that were imported from Brazil, including some tree species that were thought to be very good forage for the bees, which has created a bit of a problem in creating an imbalance in terms of our ecological zones, because some of the species are very invasive. So this forum is very, very important for me because we need, as Africa, to be able to look at what we have and be able to value what we have, the native bees that we have. I don't think we need anything or any other species to replace them, because they are adapted to our environment, and they can withstand the challenges of the pests and diseases that are decimating colonies elsewhere. So I think the starting point is, I think, such forums as this, where we need to have scientific evidence that we need to provide about the African bees and the indigenous knowledge on how our forefathers were doing beekeeping, so that we're able to perpetuate the beekeeping in Africa. And I believe that Africa is the one that is supposed to provide leadership in terms of how beekeeping is supposed to be done in a sustainable manner. Because yes, this is where we have the strongest surviving wild colonies on Earth, if I can quote my mentor, Nicola. And we can't then be net importers or consumers of beekeeping technologies that are coming from outside. Because as Nicola said, some of these technologies do not favor or do not work well with our native bees. So I think the earlier we recognize that as Africa, the better. And I'm happy that we've got these discussions where we beginning to wake up from the slumber and provide scientific evidence that indeed what we have is worth protecting and it's worth celebrating, and then be able to say, how do we move from here? So I think for now, that is what I can say. But what I want to also add to what Nicola has indicated is the perception as Africa that we need to change, especially on definitions. I'll give an example. We've had arguments with people that wanted to provide a definition for what a beekeeper is. Someone who is managed colonies, maybe so many numbers of managed colonies, is the one that qualifies to be a beekeeper. What about our forefathers who were doing beekeeping thousands and thousands of years ago? So how do we classify them? I think the moment we started doing that, and also as Nicola has said, what do we call traditional? Who has the moral standing to say what you are using in Africa is traditional and what is coming from Europe is modern? Because I think we need to ask ourselves those questions and be able to also demand for answers for us to be able to really get a fair share of the discussions that are happening and possibly contribute to the sustainable beekeeping at a global level. I think for now, that is what I can say.
That's a load.
Yes.
Emmanuel, Nina,
Yes.
Maina, you
Yes,
want to?
so I think I'll just add something to that. And yes, so it's very important for Africa to identify the significant and peculiar situation that we have, in that we have our peculiar bees who have special characteristics very different from out there. And then our bees do not really conform to most of the standards that are being set from outside. And so we will have to look inward and try to define or work to also set our own standards, and not also like just import everything that comes from outside and take that one as model. And I also like it referred to the most of the work, like most of the bees that were imported, trying to bring it to Africa to colonize, and in Ghana, the ones that we have, the history that we have, they haven't really survived. And working with beekeepers, you find that NGOs and international partners who come to help them mostly come to bring in quotes the modern beekeeping to them, and they will find like construct Landstrop hives and so many hives, give it to them, and then case in point is I went to as part of my work, and then I went to one of the community kind of chief beekeeper who had also other beekeepers under him. He has about 50 Landstrop hives in the room because they give them those hives. They went to set them up, and then the bees are not colonizing. Meanwhile, our bees are adapted to, as I said, the local forms that we have, and also the tuber hives that they have been managing or using. So I think Africa, we need to kind of look at what works for us. How do we maximize on the opportunities that we have? Our bees are resistant to diseases, and with the literature, you find that varroa, the loads that are being treated when they find it in outside UK and others, we usually research have shown that you find them in African bees, and then they will not show any signs of disease. So this shows us that we have unique species. We have the bees that behave differently, and we need to get indigenous ways of maximizing our own potential and not looking to import everything from. Yeah. So thank you.
I would like to give my own experience, because I was a very new beekeeper, and I started beekeeping in Kenya 5-6 years ago now. And I had a swarm of bees who just landed in my house in the middle of COVID. And I had to become a beekeeper to save this colony. And so I just went online, because that's the only thing I had, to learn what do we do, how do we get the swarm in a box, and so on. And all the material available to me in the middle of Lamu Island with my own internet connection was just European data. And then even training online that I did were from Europe and America. And then all the books I read, I mean, to find guides that was written by a professor, I think it was Professor Carol in Kenya, I mean, I spent an hour online. So it's also, what I'm trying to say is also for a lot of new beekeeper, people who have farms on small scale and want to start beekeeping, there is no structure. I see in the comments a lot of people said, yes, there is a organization and everything. Yeah, they are there, but how do you contact with them? How do you approach them? If you're a small farmer, you don't have, if you don't have an elder in your village that has knowledge, or a friend farmer, there's no structure. And a lot of people want to do beekeeping because it's a good income, and they are all getting free hive everywhere. And what I'm saying is, for me, there is no local infrastructure under maybe the scope of the government, as per the Ministry of, I went to the Ministry of Livestock to remove a hive in their wall. Like, that's the biggest colony I've ever removed. And when I removed the plywood, I noticed that they were already 5 times the colony moved. And then they had a colony also in a tree outside hanging, and they had a box next to it. And they said, well, we've put the box there. We hope the bees are going to get in. That was the Ministry of Livestock. And I was like, the bees are never going to get in unless you take the comb and put them in. They won't abandon their baby. So it's, maybe in other countries, the ministry do their job and everything, but here there's no support for community to start beekeeping projects. And that's why I completely agree with you. There's so many specificity with the local bees, even here in Kenya, specificity with the bees on the coast that are not the same up country. And where do people get access to this knowledge or this information? That's why I think here, we have hope to maybe be able to create cells where people can actually join. And maybe it is to be as easy as Facebook, or I don't know, whichever meaning, but people need to be having an easy access to knowledge, and not just be, because if there's no one in your area, what do you do? And then you get free hive and they end up in your store. That's what I hope will come out from gathering together, help the community to actually access knowledge, because there's a need for it.
Okay, so I'll be very brief because a lot has been said. And I think for me, there's a lot of good things that we've said here. And I liked Nicola's Bradbear's assertion of that tightening up of the vocabulary around these places, of course, supported with David and his experience. My fascination is how some of the very decisive and clear methods that are needed can actually percolate into the community, the locals themselves, so that what we're saying here is actually coming out from them. That will be a very interesting bridge to cross and to see how can we get, because the ideas are very clear. We are very, as we're presenting here, we're very clear in our heads on the path that needs to be followed. And I'm listening, anybody who listens will say, this is actually what is supposed to happen. So how do we get that to the community? As I work in the communities, I see beekeeping is being penciled in as that alternative livelihood that will bring benefit to the community. And when you talk about hives, and I think Emmanuel has said this, the hives are given for free. I've worked where it is the church which gave it. Another organization has come in, philanthropic, it has given those hives, and they're following the script as per what they've been told. So again, there you see the pressure on the community. And some of the communities, there's one community in particular, pastoralists from the Maasai community. When I was training them on value chain, they actually had a real live fear of the bees. And when the honey was ready, they hardly did much, but they dumped it into somewhere, and somebody came and collected it, and they said, wow, we've got our money, we're through with that. So the things need to actually get right down there, and so that there's the benefits of what we are saying come out in that community. I think that is the fascinating thing. And how will we get it down there? Thank you very much.
Thank you to all of you. So it's interesting to hear from all of you who are either based there or have worked there for decades. From an outsider's perspective, myself, we see great potential on the continent and instinctively want to protect this natural and cultural treasure, especially in comparison to the scarcity of free living colonies in Europe. From your perspective on the ground, is there a sense of urgency to save this precious resource, either amongst the beekeepers, amongst the larger community like farming that depends on it for pollination, or even what you're seeing on a kind of policy level from like governments and or NGO agencies and things like that? And that's a question for all of you.
Maybe I'll pick. I'll respond first. There is some agents that we need to deal with these matters, both from a developmental point of view, from an awareness point of view, and as a continent, I think it's Professor Maina who spoke about the way we're losing our forests, natural forests, to people who are looking at sources of livelihood. Cutting down trees that have indigenous trees that have taken maybe 40, 50, 60 years to grow, to burn and have a bag of charcoal that will cost about $2. It's sad. And and even FAO has the statistics that Africa is losing up to 4 million hectares of forests, which is nearly double the global rate of deforestation. So from where we stand as the Regional Commission for Africa, we believe that beekeeping can really play a significant role in conserving our forests, our natural resources, and not only fight poverty, but we can create wealth for many communities because we have the locally available resources that are good enough for people to make business out of their own localities. So we can't waste another day, if I can use that expression, when we're losing our forests that are being destroyed for some reasons that are not even worth it. So it's very urgent for us to start having these discussions of preserving our natural resources. And fortunately, with beekeeping, which makes conserving our environment being done at a profit. And I think so that's the angle that I would look at it. And I'm sure that with example of Bees for Development, the work they have done, if we're able to have maybe enough resources to support the initiatives that they're doing, because the approach is not to dump technologies, but to capacitate the communities to be able to train them how to make the hives using the locally available materials, meaning that we can unlock the resources that are being used maybe to buy those fancy equipment for other urgent needs. So I think this is what we need, and it's urgent, without taking much of time. But from a regional commission point of view, this is what we need. Thank you.
It's a great point. Anyone else?
Yes, I'd like to emphasize what Nina said, really, that the huge problem for all honeybees is our pesticides. And it's absolutely true that the pesticides that we're not using here in Europe are now being dumped in Africa. And it's kind of terrifying to see how these highly toxic chemicals, they're far more toxic than those old things like DDT and pyrethrum. Modern pesticides are so toxic, not just to honeybees, but the whole ecosystem. They get into the water resources. They're so foul. I think that's the huge imperative. And if you have some data going forward about numbers of honeybee colonies, then it gives you a baseline, because we know that honeybees and all of the insect world are dying from these pesticides, and it's a huge issue. To go back to Nina's point, really, there is no government support for beekeeping because it's something practiced by poor and disempowered people. So because there's no perception of the beekeeping sector as a commercial industry, it doesn't receive the support it should. But actually, honeybee colonies belonging to beekeepers act as sentinels for all of the insects that are now being lost, all of the biodiversity that's being lost from these really foul pesticides.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's just going to get worse.
Yeah, there's an interesting indicator listening to Nicola talk that I thought about. When I reflect back some 40 years ago, we come from a rural area that's about 600 kilometers from Nairobi. One of the things that I noticed a lot was the mishmash of insects that collided with the windscreen. In fact, there was a special, you were advised to put soapy water, so that as the insects smash against you and you do the wipers, the fat does not remain. 40 years later, I drive on the same road. Not an insect collides with me, not even one. So that something must be happening out there that is really wrong for our ecosystem.
Yeah, that's the same, I think, all over in the United States and Europe. Yeah. Anyone else want to comment on that before I ask the next question? We only have about not even 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask a very general question, which is, what words of advice do you have for people here in the audience who are eager to help and participate in either data collection, starting a citizen science project to study the bees, or getting involved in conservation, or getting involved in bringing people together? What could be some first steps towards realizing this initiative?
Well, I think you've started a first step, Steve, by drawing attention to free living honeybee colonies and their importance for beekeeping, but also for the whole of the biodiversity in Africa.
I think my comment or my contribution will be, it starts with us as individuals, and then let's start discussing and asking questions, be it from our policy makers at a group level. Let's start to ask questions so that we have answers that would help us construct solutions to challenges we have. But it's important for us to take up as individuals whatever that we need to do, to talk about it, to discuss, to engage, to encourage. Otherwise, should not wait for someone who should come from outside Africa to tell us what problems we have and how we can resolve the problems. But it has to be an intrinsic, we need to look at it from an inward point of view, to say, how do we address the challenges that we have? How do we conserve our bees from an African perspective? I think that's what we need to do.
I totally agree. And coming from an association that's looking at the whole of Africa, I would suggest a mobilization into across country be focused a group with the stakeholders. And why I say this, I see the power of the bird group of Europe, the impact they had in the world, including the various conventions, Ramsar Convention, and a few others. And it just came from the desire to preserve the habitat for birds. And eventually it became the Biodiversity Convention. So don't we see that the bee group can spark that conservation in Africa? CITSI Africa, as I said, is willing to offer that platform, get all the beekeepers together, but sorry, not beekeepers, David, but get the bee interested people involved, and that could be a spark of the rest of the conservation effort that we have in Africa. It will then benefit even elephants on the far end of everything.
Yeah, for sure. It's all connected.
I think it will take all of us here as bee scientists. I think we will have to continue with advocacy. One, we also be like as mentioned, to form the local groups and try to advocate, and try to also any forum that we are present in, to let the point be clear that it's not only about maximizing profit from the bees through beekeeping and livelihoods, but we also need, as Africa, we have the peculiar case of we relying heavily on the wild, so we need to focus on conserving the wild population, and that will mean less of the pesticides used, less of the environmental degradation, less of the distractions, and that will ensure that we have a healthy population, and that is resistance that as we have, so that it can sustain any policies that government or other NGOs try to push. Because you tend to find that the focus is granting the livelihoods, but not so much on protecting the bee populations that are the main ones that will be used, or as in our case, are the ones that beekeepers get to start their colonies and then have their operations for them to have those livelihood ends as their end product. So I think any forum and also just advocating by bee scientists and then individuals are interested in bees, so that the message is across that the bees need to be protected first before we talk about the livelihoods and the other benefits that they bring to us. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. We unfortunately are running out of time, so I'm going to very abruptly end the panel discussion, which I would love to hear more from you, but I don't want to go too far over our 3-hour allocation. So thank you for this very tip of the iceberg of a conversation, especially to our special guests, Nicola and David. So thank you for representing Apimondia. Thank you for representing Bees for Development and your other organizations. What we are going to do in the last few minutes, Arrigo, you have a couple of questions to ask people in a second poll.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is gain momentum, because it's evident that people are interested in this topic. It's evident that there's much more to discuss. And it's also evident that we start by connecting and having the conversation. So if you could issue the next poll, it's to basically understand whether or not you thought that this was useful, whether or not you'd like to see more of this. What I would like to do is thank our speakers, Nina, Maina, and Emmanuel. Thank you for sharing your experiences and kind of thoughts about the future for studying and protecting free-living colonies in Africa. On June 19th, we have an event that is about nature-based, sorry to say this, Nicola, nature-based traditions and techniques in Africa. We have 3 speakers, Janet Loari from Bees for Development, who I believe is still with us today and has been sharing information in the chat. We have Jason Runo, who's in Kenya, and Tibibu, I think, has joined us, or maybe is still with us, from Ethiopia. We have 2 other events that are in the year that I mentioned briefly. In September 18th, we have 3 PhD students talking about their current research and data findings. And in December, talking about policy issues and how they affect or can help to work towards conservation of free-living colonies. So get in touch with us, sign up, participate in other events that we're offering. And hopefully you've got, maybe we can spend 2 more minutes on this poll.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
And then I think we can wrap up.
Yeah.
Because
And I want to thank all 51 of the participants. Actually, that includes me too. So all the 50 other people who are still here after 3 hours, thank you so much. It shows dedication and interest in this topic that is really a passion project for us at Honeybee Watch, and we would love to expand that interest in the honeybee or the free-living honeybees, and more importantly, spark projects there in Africa to study them, to protect them, to spread awareness about them, etc. So thank you, everybody.
let's give it another 30 seconds or so. Thank you,
Sure.
Nicola.
And just to reiterate, we will be following up. We have recorded this video. We will eventually upload it onto our website and to our YouTube channel. We'll share that video link with you. The responses to the polls, we'll share the chat, and then there might be other resources and ways to connect you. And if you did offer to volunteer, we will be in touch with you.
So I'm going to end the poll.
Okay. And then we can end our session.
Yes, I would say so.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you very much.